Welcome to the Essential Video Guide of Star Wars Planets. I always loved the Essential Guide reference books growing up, and I thought I would start a similar series. This is what I'm hoping will be Volume 1, covering the worlds of the live-action films, so it's a little more basic, talking about very well-known planets, but hopefully I can still teach you something new about each one. I'm planning to expand this series into more volumes, getting deeper and deeper into the live-action and animated series, video games, books, comics, and so on, but still, my hope is that you might learn at least one new thing about even the most familiar planets in Star Wars. Speaking of, let's start with Tatooine.
If there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet that it's farthest from.
Tatooine is probably the most well-known planet in all of Star Wars, serving as the home for both Anakin and Luke Skywalker. Long before the rise of the Empire, the planet was covered in oceans and life, but over time, the oceans dried away, leaving its native people to adapt and survive. Those beings became known as Jawas and Tusken Raiders. Thousands of years of history saw several failed attempts to set up mining colonies in the desert. Sandcrawlers abandoned by frustrated mining corporations were taken by Jawas to use as mobile bases. Tatooine's remote location and hostile climate made it a growing haven for the scum and villainy of the galaxy. Slavery, smuggling, and all sorts of criminal activity thrived there, and it was one of the headquarters for the notorious Hutt cartel. Efforts to end the slave trade on Tatooine took shape in the final days of the Galactic Republic, spearheaded by Sabe, a former handmaiden of the Queen of Naboo, and a local network that included Beru White Sun Lars. She was more well known as the aunt of Luke Skywalker, who was raised on the desert world. After the fall of the Galactic Empire, even more beings stood up against the lawlessness that ruled their planet, like the Marshal Cobb Vanth and the former bounty hunter Boba Fett, who both fought against the spread of the Pike Syndicate in their territory.
No. Alderaan is peace, but we have no weapons. You can't
You will
possibly...
convert another target?
Alderaan is a planet most known for its destruction and not its life, but it had thousands of years of history before the arrival of the Death Star. Alderaan was one of the original founders of the Old Republic about 25 millennia before it was destroyed. It was an idyllic world covered in grassy fields and snow-topped mountains. It was known across the galaxy as a world of peace and art. Education there was completely free, and learning and teaching were both equally encouraged. Alderaan was ruled by a monarchy, and at the time of the Clone Wars thrived under Queen Breha Organa. Her husband, Bail, held the rank of first chairman of Alderaan, and also served the world as its senator in the Galactic Republic. The Organas were staunch political opponents of Emperor Palpatine, but Alderaan's status in the galaxy and prominence in the core worlds kept the planet safe from any form of retaliation, at least until the creation of the Death Star, a weapon Imperial leadership assumed would keep the galaxy too afraid to rise up against them. Alderaan was used as proof that no world was above reprisal. Behind the scenes, in the original drafts of Star Wars, Alderaan was the name of the Imperial capital and would have resembled Cloud City. As the story changed, Alderaan would shift into becoming a symbol of resistance against the Empire.
We're approaching the planet Yavin. The rebel base is on a moon on the far side.
Yavin 4 was one of 26 moons that orbited the gas giant Yavin. It was most well known as the site of one of the Galactic Empire's greatest military losses, seeing the destruction of the first Death Star and the death of Grand Moff Tarkin at the hands of the Rebel Alliance. Thousands of years before the Galactic Civil War, the Jungle World was the home of a warrior culture called the Massassi. According to legend, they were enslaved by a Sith Lord called Naga Sadow, who instructed them to build great stone temples in his honor. But other stories connect them to the Ordu Aspectu, an offshoot of the Jedi Order that became obsessed with immortality. Their fortress was lost to time about 20,000 years before the Rebel Alliance established their base on the moon. Shortly after their evacuation, the archaeologist Dr. Aphra came to the Great Temple and found a clue to the Ordu, leading her to the long-lost ruins. The Empire would see another loss in the Yavin system after the Battle of Endor and the destruction of the second Death Star. Vanguard Squadron fought and disabled the Imperial Star Destroyer Victorum in the skies above Yavin Prime. With the Empire defeated, Yavin 4 experienced years of peace and was the homeworld of the famed Resistance pilot Poe Dameron.
The report is only a fragment from a probe droid in the Hoth system, but it's the best lead we've had.
Hoth was an ice-covered world located in the Outer Rim. Its temperatures could fall to negative 60 degrees Celsius at night or negative 76 Fahrenheit. It was home to very few forms of life. Wampas were the apex predators of the planet, while Tauntauns served as their primary prey. The Rebel Alliance established a new base on Hoth between 2 and 3 years after the Battle of Yavin. They spent dangerous months carving rooms and tunnels out of the ice in a cave, only for the Empire to discover them and drive them back on the run. Shortly after the death of the Emperor, the Imperial Governor Adelhard created a blockade around his sector of space, which included Hoth. The ice world would become the site of a second battle between the Empire and a group of resistance fighters stuck behind the Iron Blockade. As the Empire continued to fall, some members of its ranks feared Hoth would become a prison planet, but as far as we know, that never came to pass. Although we've only ever seen snow, ice, and mountains on Hoth, a third of the planet was actually covered in oceans.
You will go to the Dagobah system.
Dagobah was a swamp planet located in the outer rim of the galaxy. It was at least somewhat known at the height of the Galactic Republic because the Jedi of the High Republic had a record of the planet as one that was strong in the Force thanks to its flourishing plant and animal life. It was also the site of a Vergence in the Force, a cave that was strong in the dark side. At some point, Qui-Gon Jinn traveled to Dagobah during his journey to learn the secrets of life through the cosmic force. After his death, his spirit led Yoda there as well in the final days of the Clone Wars. Yoda also learned how to maintain his consciousness after death, and when the Empire rose from the ashes of the Republic, Yoda exiled himself on Dagobah to continue communing with the Force. He occasionally ventured into the dark side cave to confront and overcome his fears, weaknesses, and failures of the past. When Yoda was nearly 9 centuries old, he trained Luke Skywalker on Dagobah, sending the young man into the dark side cave as well. Even Supreme Leader Snoke took Kylo Ren to the cave as part of his training, and his student destroyed it during his vision.
Lando's system?
Lando's not a system, he's a man.
Bespin was a gas giant planet located in the Outer Rim. It was a source of Tabana gas, which could be processed and used as fuel, so the planet itself doesn't have much of interest outside of Cloud City. It was founded by a Corellian named Ecclesis Fig, who freed a number of Ugnaught slaves that then constructed the city itself. The Ugnaught clans chose to remain there and still populated Cloud City by the time of the Galactic Civil War. Most of the people who lived there worked as Tabana gas miners. About 1 year after the Battle of Yavin, Lando Calrissian won ownership of the city in a game of sabacc, becoming its Baron Administrator. After the Battle of Hoth, it fell under the control of the Empire, and the Imperial Governor Adelhard made it his personal headquarters. After the death of the Emperor, he created an iron blockade to isolate Bespin and the rest of the Anowit sector, but Resistance fighters aided by Lando and Lobot successfully liberated their home. 30 years later, Cloud City still floated above Bespin, and its citizens fought for their freedom once more against the First Order.
The Death Star orbiting the forest moon of Endor.
Endor was a gas giant located in the Outer Rim. The forest moon of Endor was often simply called Endor since it was the most populated planetary body in the system. It was the homeworld of several sentient species, including the Yuzum, the Dulok, and most notably the Ewoks. They existed in tribes across the planet, and their greatest threats were the giant carnivorous Goraks. Some Ewoks built effigies and made sacrifices to the massive creatures, but others defended their homes by building log traps. After the destruction of the Death Star at the Battle of Yavin, the Empire invaded Endor, establishing it as the remote construction site of a second version of the superweapon. A shield generator was built on the forest moon, but the Ewoks allied themselves with the Rebel Alliance and helped bring down the shield protecting the incomplete Death Star, allowing the rebels to destroy it. Again. The Alliance set up shield generators and tractor beams to protect Endor and its inhabitants from any debris. After the celebration, Endor was the site of Han Solo and Leia Organa's wedding ceremony. The First Order apparently came to the moon after the destruction of the New Republic, but was also defeated.
We've got to warn the Naboo and contact Chancellor Valorum.
Naboo was a mid-rim planet most well known for being the homeworld of Emperor Palpatine. Its native people were the Gungans, who fought against human colonists who arrived about 4,000 years before Palpatine's rise to power. They eventually found a tenuous peace, but the two groups strongly mistrusted one another. Naboo didn't join the Galactic Republic until the year 867 BBY, an event that was celebrated in what they called the Festival of Light. It became known as a world dedicated to the arts as well as democracy. They were ruled by an elected monarch who would often be a young teenaged girl, although many kings were elected throughout their history as well. Their primary export was plasma, which was found in the planet's crust and was used to power their cities. Its core was a mystery to scientists because it was not molten, but was instead simply made up of oceans and caves. Naboo became central to galactic history when Sheev Palpatine orchestrated a blockade of his homeworld through the Trade Federation, which helped his rise to become Supreme Chancellor and set the stage for the Clone Wars, which he would use to proclaim himself Emperor of the Galaxy. After his death, Naboo would become a target of Operation Cinder, but New Republic forces assisted the planetary military against the failing Empire.
Coruscant. The entire planet is one big city.
Coruscant was one of the most important worlds in the Star Wars galaxy. Its planet-wide city began construction 100,000 years before the events of the films and continued until it reached over 5,000 levels high. The lowest levels became uninhabitable and unreachable by sunlight. The wealthy who lived on the upper levels enjoyed climate-controlled weather and could visit the Peak of Umate, one of the final pieces of untouched land on the planet. Coruscant was one of the founders of the Old Republic and served as the capital of the galaxy for over 25,000 years. It also served as the primary headquarters of the Jedi Order and was an important site to their Sith enemies throughout history. After the fall of the Galactic Empire, the New Republic rotated their capital throughout the galaxy to avoid favoritism of the core worlds, but Coruscant still served as a vital part of its infrastructure, even when the Senate wasn't meeting there. Many galactic historians considered Coruscant to be the homeworld of humanity, but that fact was disputed and unconfirmed.
Camino, I'm not familiar with it. Is it in the Republic?
Camino was a remote ocean world located in wild space. The Kaminoan people once lived on land, but a great flood covered their world, fundamentally changing the planet and its people. The Kaminoans built cities set atop massive stilts and began studies into cloning technology to save their dying culture. They set up a handful of colonies, and their reputation as expert cloners spread throughout the galaxy. Their services were quietly hired by the Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas, who asked them to create a clone army for the Republic, but the project was taken over by the Sith, who murdered Sifo-Dyas, then deleted all records of Camino from the Jedi Temple archives. The Kaminoans began work on the secret army, but their prime minister was aware of an underlying plot to destroy the Jedi using those very clones. When the Jedi were wiped out and the Empire took the place of the Republic, Camino was seen as a massive loose end. Imperial forces bombarded the cities and cloning facilities of the planet. Little is known about Camino after the attack, and the Kaminoan people became a rare sight in the galaxy.
Geonosis is less than a parsec away.
Geonosis was a desert world located in the Outer Rim not too far from Tatooine. The Geonosian people largely lived in underground cities and caves because the surface of the planet was irradiated. Despite their primitive appearance, Geonosians were highly skilled engineers and were central to the manufacture of the droid armies that fought in the Clone Wars. When their Archduke, Poggle the Lesser, was captured, the Republic learned they also had plans to develop a planet-killing superweapon. The Republic, at Chancellor Palpatine's insistence, forced the Geonosians to build the weapon for them instead of the Separatists. When the Clone Wars came to an end, construction was well underway. Delays in the development of the super laser caused the Empire to move construction to Scarif, and the Geonosian people were nearly exterminated. But the Egg of a Queen survived and was cared for. Unfortunately, she was only able to create new battle droids. Even more unfortunately, Darth Vader stole most of her machinery and decimated her children. The Empire attempted to restart the droid factories of Geonosis after the death of Emperor Palpatine, but were foiled by New Republic forces.
He's hiding in the Utapau system.
Utapau was an outer rim world covered in flatlands that were pockmarked by massive sinkholes. At the bottom of those holes was supposedly a planet-wide body of water called the World Ocean. The water eroded the continents of Utapau, causing most of the planet's surface to be highly unstable. The Utai and the Powans who lived there settled on the most stable continent of their world, setting up civilizations inside the sinkholes. Utapau's remote location made it ideal for covert operations during the Clone Wars. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker investigated a murder there, leading to the discovery and destruction of a huge kyber crystal that Darth Sidious planned to use for the Death Star's super laser. Shortly after that event, General Grievous used Utapau as a base after his retreat from the Battle of Coruscant. The planet was liberated by Republic troops, and was then quickly occupied after the execution of Order 66 and the rise of the Empire.
What about the droid attack on the Wookiees?
Kashyyyk was a jungle planet covered in massive Roshur trees that was located in the mid-rim of the galaxy. It was most well known as the homeworld of the noble Wookiee people. Unfortunately, their physical strength made them the target of slavery several times throughout galactic history. They were a deeply spiritual people who believed the Roshur trees were their planet's true owners. They made their villages within the trees themselves, living in harmony with nature. The Great Origin Tree was considered to be sacred, and Wookiees would climb it as a rite of passage. Their spirituality made them natural allies of the Jedi, and some of their ranks would join the Order themselves. Clone troopers were present on Kashyyyk during the rise of the Empire, which led to a hasty Imperial occupation of the world and enslavement of the Wookiee people. Saw Gerrera and the Jedi Padawan in hiding, Cal Kestis, worked alongside freedom fighters in a failed attempt to liberate the planet, but Kashyyyk wouldn't be truly free again until after the Battle of Endor. While the New Republic struggled to maintain delicate control of the galaxy, Han Solo and Chewbacca defied orders to liberate the Wookiees on their own, forcing the New Republic to join the fight, leading to the surrender of Imperial forces.
I suggest you move the Separatist leaders to Mustafar.
Mustafar was a small lava-covered planet in the Outer Rim. At least a millennia before the rise of the Empire, it was covered in beautiful plant life, and humans lived there in peace with the Mustafarian people. But the Lady Korvax stole a Mustafarian relic called the Bright Star, believing it would have the power to resurrect her fallen husband. Her misuse of its power spread devastation across the planet, turning it into a wasteland. Mustafar became valued for its ores, and so it became a base for the Techno-Union as well as criminal syndicates like Black Sun. It was, of course, the site of Darth Vader's terrible injuries, and after years of hunting the survivors of Order 66, the Sith Lord returned to build his fortress there. His true purpose was to use the planet's connection to the dark side of the Force to resurrect his wife. He failed on 2 separate occasions, but during one attempt he recovered and used the Bright Star. After that failure, its energy was released across Mustafar and the planet began to slowly heal. 30 years after his own death, Darth Vader's grandson, Kylo Ren, would return to the ruins of the fortress during his quest to find the secret path to the Sith world Exegol.
Jakku, that junkyard?
Thank you.
Jakku was a desert world located in the western reaches of the Inner Rim. It was most well known as the site of the final devastating battle of the Galactic Civil War. Its proximity to the unknown regions made it an ideal site for studying that part of the galaxy, and so Emperor Palpatine built an observatory that calculated new paths into that dangerous territory. After Palpatine's death, Jakku became central to his contingency plan, Operation Cinder. His agents orchestrated several terrible attacks on planets across the galaxy, culminating at the Battle of Jakku. The observatory there was meant to transmit coordinates to members of the Galactic Empire who were deemed worthy to survive and continue the fight. But the observatory was also equipped to annihilate Jakku, wiping out all remaining forces, New Republic and Imperial alike. The destruction of the planet was stopped, but some members of the Empire did escape into the unknown regions. The Imperials left behind surrendered to the New Republic. The wreckage on Jakku attracted scavengers who scraped out a living in the desert. Nearly 3 decades after the Battle of Jakku is when Rey met a defecting stormtrooper named Finn and joined the fight against the First Order.
I didn't know there was this much green in the whole galaxy.
Takodana was a mid-rim planet covered in beautiful lakes and forests. Long ago, it was the site of a battle between the Jedi and the Sith. The castle of the pirate queen Maz Kanata would be built on the site of the battle at least 1,000 years before the rise of the First Order. During the time of the High Republic, she lived happily and peacefully alongside the Jedi, who also set up a temple on the shores of the same lake. Eventually, that temple was destroyed by the Nile, a group of marauders who fought against the Jedi and the Republic over a century before the Clone Wars. Maz Kanata's castle was a haven for all kinds of people who wished to lie low or change their fates. The rules of the castle forbade violence of any kind to anyone found inside its walls. Jyn Erso spent about a year there before she was arrested and sent to the prison world Wobani. Han Solo took Finn, Rey, and BB-8 to the castle, which attracted the attention of the First Order, who destroyed Maz's home.
This fierce machine which you have built.
Starkiller Base was a planet originally found in the unknown regions, but it was once called by another name, Ilum. That world was discovered by the Jedi Order tens of thousands of years before its destruction. It was a major source of kyber crystals, which powered lightsabers, and so became a sacred planet for the Jedi. Younglings would travel there to undergo a ritual called the Gathering, where they would face and overcome their fears and weaknesses to claim a kyber crystal and build their first lightsabers. After the destruction of the Jedi Order, Ilum was quickly discovered, likely thanks to traitorous Inquisitors who were all former Jedi themselves. Within a year, the Empire began excavating the planet, stealing its kyber crystals to power the Death Star's superlaser. After the fall of the Empire, First Order engineers returned to Ilum to transform the entire world into a superweapon itself. It was made mobile, which was necessary because it had to drain the energy of a star to power its superlaser. When Starkiller Base was destroyed, it left behind a new miniature star that came to be known as Solo. Hosnian Prime was an urban planet in the core worlds. While it was made up of large cities, it was not entirely covered with buildings the same way Coruscant was. Thanks to its status in the core, it didn't feel the oppression of the Empire as harshly as many worlds in the more remote regions of space. Although plenty of its citizens opposed Imperial rule, Hosnian Prime's leadership largely remained neutral throughout the Galactic Civil War, including its senator Hamato Ziono. After the Empire's defeat, the New Republic began to rotate the location of its Senate and capital. Hosnian Prime was voted to be the capital about 6 years before the rise of the First Order, and seemingly kept that privilege until the planet's destruction at the hands of Starkiller Base.
The Ilenium system!
Yes, the Ilenium system, that's the one.
Dakar was a green world located in the Outer Rim. It was the site of the Resistance base during the destruction of Hosnian Prime and the rise of the First Order. Similar to Yavin 4, it was once home to an ancient civilization that left behind ruins that the Resistance eventually used as their headquarters. The Rebel Alliance also set up a small outpost there in the final days of the Galactic Civil War, but after the Empire's surrender, it was quickly abandoned. The Resistance returned about 30 years later to establish a permanent base of operations and remained there until Starkiller Base was revealed to the galaxy. A recon flight by a Resistance pilot was tracked back to Dakar, forcing them to evacuate the planet.
People that knew him best think he went looking for the first Jedi temple.
Ahch-To was an ocean world hidden away in the unknown regions. It was considered by many historians to be the site of the very first Jedi Temple, created 25,000 years before the time of the Clone Wars. As the truth was lost to history, several other options were considered as possible birthplaces for the Jedi, including Tython, Ossus, Jedha, and even Coruscant. After the Battle of Endor, Luke Skywalker discovered a Jedi star compass in one of Emperor Palpatine's vaults on the planet Pilio. He also rescued the final 2 pieces of the Great Tree that stood inside the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. By studying its origins and working with the compass with the help of a scholar named Lor San Tekka, Luke was able to find Ahch-To once again. He kept the information to himself and exiled himself there after his nephew's fall to the dark side. San Tekka was able to help the Resistance find the planet themselves thanks to his previous research coupled with Imperial information stored in R2-D2's databanks. Similar to Dagobah, Ahch-To was strong in the Force and was home to a dark side Vergence.
It's a terrible place filled with the worst people in the galaxy.
Cantonica was a desert world located in the corporate sector of the Outer Rim. That region of the galaxy was governed by the Corporate Sector Authority, making it a place where the Republic and the Empire basically allowed corporations to run their territory however they wanted. Cantonica itself was unremarkable except for being home to the casino city Canto Bight. It was known as a playground for the wealthy elite of the galaxy who profited off the misery of others. Criminal syndicates like the Sixth Kin and Zarek Besh took advantage of the citizens of the planet living in the Workers' District who hoped to get out from under the thumb of their rich oppressors, only to find themselves stuck under the thumbs of crime lords.
The mineral planet Crate, an uncharted hideout from the days of the rebellion.
Crate was a mineral planet in the Outer Rim. Covered in salt flats on the surface, it also contained caves full of rhodochrosite. The creatures that survived on Crate, like the fox-like Volptices, also developed crystalline features. In the early days of the rebellion, Bail Organa established a base there that was discovered by his 16-year-old daughter, Leia. Shortly after the destruction of the first Death Star and the evacuation of the Yavin base, Leia returned there, hoping to revive the old settlement. But they were discovered by the Empire and forced to flee again. The base was nearly the site of the last stand of the Resistance, who attempted to escape the First Order after the destruction of Hosnian Prime, but Luke Skywalker's force projection gave the survivors enough time to escape.
The Emperor and his fleet have been hiding in the unknown regions on a world called Exegol.
Exegol was a mysterious, desolate world located in the unknown regions. Kind of like a mirrored dark-side version of Ahch-To, it was a significant planet to the Sith Order. According to the sacred Jedi texts, Exegol was once filled with life, but the Sith corrupted and destroyed the world, turning it into a wasteland plagued by static discharges and dry storms. Darth Sidious had knowledge of the secret world as well as a wayfinder to chart a course to its location. There he commanded the Sith Eternal, a cult that worked to unlock the secrets to immortality for their emperor. They also constructed a massive fleet of planet-killing Star Destroyers over the course of decades. They were powered by taking shards of Kyber from a mountain of the living crystal that had been bled and turned red by the Sith. After his supposed death at the Battle of Endor, Palpatine's spirit retreated to a faulty clone body on Exegol, where his disciples continued struggling to create a vessel strong enough to contain his power. They inadvertently created a strandcast they called Snoke, who was sent out to lead the First Order as a puppet in Palpatine's absence while he waited for his true return. But that day would never come, as Exegol became the site of the final battle between the Sith and the rest of the galaxy. The Sith Eternal fleet was destroyed along with Palpatine, his acolytes, and even his throne. Agen Kloss was a jungle moon in the outer rim of the galaxy. It was the site of a Resistance base a year after the Battle of Crate, and like many hidden bases, it was likely built within the ruins of a long-gone civilization. The original inhabitants of Agen Kloss were simply called the Kloss, and they disappeared long before the Resistance moved in. It was scouted by Alderaanians before the Galactic Civil War and was included on a list for potential rebel bases. While the rebellion never made use of it, Luke Skywalker briefly trained his sister, Leia Organa, as a Jedi there, comparing it to Dagobah. When Leia became leader of the Resistance, she returned to Agen Kloss with Rey, where she could also continue her training in the Force. Pasaana was a desert planet located in the expansion region. Its climate meant it held several dangers found on other desert worlds, like sinking fields and even sarlaccs. The Aki-Aki were the native culture of Pasaana. While they appeared to be somewhat primitive, several Aki-Aki were seen throughout the galaxy, suggesting they were familiar with space travel. Over a decade before the rise of the First Order, the Sith assassin Ochi of Bestoon was sent to bring Rey to Exegol. Her parents hid her on Jakku and lured Ochi away to a separate desert planet, Pisana. They were caught and killed, but Ochi took the bait and perished in the sinking fields. Lando Calrissian also followed the assassin to Pisana, hoping to find a lead on his own kidnapped daughter, but when the trail went cold, he remained in the desert as a hermit. Rey and her friends would return to Pisana, once again picking up Ochi's trail as they searched for a wayfinder and the path to Exegol in the final days of the First Order.
But he's on Kijimi.
What's wrong with Kijimi?
I had a little bad luck on Kijimi.
Kijimi was a snowy, mountain-covered planet found in the mid-rim of the galaxy. It was once home to a religious group called the Dai Bindu, a possible precursor group to the Jedi Order who were thought to be responsible for creating the very first holocrons. But the monks were driven away and Kijimi fell under the control of criminal syndicates. During the reign of the Empire, the Ashiga clan maintained the most power there, but Crimson Dawn's syndicate war made them vulnerable. The Spice Runners of Kijimi, led by Zeva Bliss, used the chaos of the final days of the Galactic Civil War to grasp more territory. From the time of the New Republic until the rise of the First Order, their gang was the primary syndicate on the planet. But Kijimi and its years of history were destroyed by the Sith Eternal and one of their planet-killing Star Destroyers.
On a moon in the Endor system, from the southern shore.
Keth Bir was a moon in the Endor system covered by oceans and grasslands. While its atmosphere was breathable and was home to several creatures, it was largely uninhabited until the rise of the First Order. It was named by the Ewoks who lived on the forest moon of Endor in the same system. When the second Death Star was destroyed, the Rebel Alliance set up shield generators and tractor beams to protect the Ewoks in their home, but no protections were set up for Keth Bir, and so massive chunks of the superweapon crashed into its oceans. The debris leaked toxins into the water, creating an ecological disaster. A group of former First Order stormtroopers hid themselves away on the moon after their mutiny. They were met by Rey and her friends on their quest to find a Sith Wayfinder, which was held in the wreckage of the Death Star.
I see the Council is sending you with us to Jeddah.
Jeddah was a desert moon in the mid-rim that orbited the planet Na Jeddah. Along with Octo, Ossus, Tython, and other worlds, it was debated by historians as being one of the potential birthplaces of the Jedi Order. While Octo is the likely true answer, Jeddah was still an important spiritual world to not only the Jedi, but many Force-based belief systems. Similar to Ilum, it was a world rich in kyber crystals and home to several temples, churches, and other spiritual sites. During the time of the High Republic, a great battle broke out when the moon hosted peace talks between two warring planets. The summit was sabotaged by a cult called the Path of the Open Hand, but the Jedi and the Guardians of the Wills were able to pacify the fighting. After the rise of the Empire, the moon fell under occupation while Imperials ransacked religious sites for their kyber crystals, which they used to power the Death Star. During this time, it was part of a network called the Hidden Path, which helped hide and relocate surviving members of the Jedi Order and young endangered Force sensitives. But they were discovered and eliminated by Darth Vader. Saw Gerrera brought his partisans to fight the Empire for a time, and when the Death Star was completed, Jeddah became the site of its first test fire, which destroyed the Holy City and fractured the planet. When construction on the second Death Star began, the Empire returned to the ashes of Jeddah, but were driven away by Luke Skywalker and his friends.
Squadron up. Target Edu.
Edu was a rocky and storm-covered world located in the Outer Rim. During the reign of the Empire, it was controlled by Grand Moff Tarkin, which may be why its name is so similar to his homeworld, Eriadu. Tarkin built a kyber refinery on the world where Galen Erso was hidden away to research and develop the Death Star's superlaser. Immediately after the weapon's first test fire, it was discovered and attacked by rebel agents who destroyed the refinery. The head of security for Edu, Captain Magna Tolvan, was disgraced by the event and sought to correct her mistakes in the aftermath of the Battle of Yavin. Instead, she would wind up defecting to join the Rebel Alliance.
Scarif! They're going to Scarif!
Scarif was a tropical beach planet in the Outer Rim. Its remote location made it ideal to hide secret projects away from the prying eyes of the Imperial Senate, so about 10 years after the creation of the Empire, the Death Star project was moved from Geonosis to Scarif, and the Citadel Security Complex was built. The tower housed the plans for the Death Star along with countless other secret Imperial projects. Despite its confidentiality, Scarif was discovered by the Rebel Alliance shortly after the Death Star's completion. A strike team invaded the Citadel Tower and transmitted the superweapons plans to the Rebel fleet, but all those on the ground were killed by a blast from the Death Star itself. The planet likely fractured, similar to the fate of Jeddah.
Look, I came up running scams on the streets of Corellia.
Corellia was a planet in the core worlds known for its shipyards and pilots. They were responsible for constructing iconic ships like the Imperial Star Destroyer, TIE Fighters, the YT-1300, and the rest of the YT line. Corellians were some of the first intergalactic travelers, and their colonies spanned across the galaxy. After the rise of the Empire, Corellian factories were overtaken and forced to produce Imperial starships. The citizens of the world became overworked and downtrodden, and the atmosphere was polluted. Criminal groups like the White Worms, the Unbroken Clan, and Mourner's Wail preyed on orphans and those with nowhere else to turn. When the Empire was defeated, Corellia regained its own identity and the planet began to heal. However, Imperial agents still worked in the factories and continued their support of the Imperial Remnant. When the First Order took control of the galaxy, Corellia and its shipyards were one of its first targets for occupation.
It's their planet, we're the hostiles.
Mimbin was a swampy, muddy world located in the expansion region of the galaxy. It was once covered in more plant life, but over a decade of war ruined its landscape. It was rich in hyperbarite, a resource sought after by the Separatists in the Clone Wars. The Republic's clone army trained and fought alongside the Mimbinese for the entirety of the conflict, and when the Empire rose in place of the Republic, clone allies became enemies. The Mimbinese began to fight Imperial forces, and the war raged on for at least 9 more years. Han Solo was sent to Mimbin's front lines as punishment for washing out of the Imperial Academy. There he met the Wookiee Chewbacca and the scoundrel Tobias Beckett, who took them off Mimbin to begin working for the criminal syndicates. Vandor was a snowy world in the Mid-Rim. As part of the galactic frontier, it was not highly populated, but the Ypso Bay Trading Company established Fort Ypso centuries before the rise of the Empire. Although the company disappeared, the fort remained as a warm pit stop for travelers. The Empire made the planet a depository where it held valuable cargo like coaxium. Vandor was also the site of an impound lot which briefly housed the Millennium Falcon after it was captured by the Empire. It was where Han Solo attempted a failed heist of coaxium and where he met Lando Calrissian and laid eyes on the Falcon for the first time.
What are we going to do? We'll be sent to the spice mines of Kessel or smashed into who knows what.
Kessel was a mining planet located in the Outer Rim, hidden inside the Acades Maelstrom. One half of the world was dedicated to mining resources like coaxium and spice, while the other half was beautiful and inhabited by the planet's ruler, King Yoruba. Obadiah, the homeworld of the Pike Syndicate, sat just outside of the Acades Maelstrom and therefore came to control many of the mining operations on Kessel. But the Galactic Empire also laid claim to some of the mining facilities, sending political enemies there to work as slaves. The safest path through the Acades Maelstrom was 20 parsecs long, but if pilots braved Carbonbergs, Suma Verminoths, and other dangers within the Maelstrom, they could make a Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs, if they survived, and if they rounded down.
He's saying Savarine?
Savarine!
Savarine was located in the Outer Rim and was covered by oceans and deserts. Its only location of note was an old coaxium refinery that was used by Han Solo after his successful Kessel run. It was there that both Dryden Voss and Tobias Beckett lost their lives. Many Savarines were likewise killed at the hands of Crimson Dawn over the years, and those that were lost were memorialized using structures called soul teeth. Built along the shore of the Emerald Sea, each rock was meant to act as an anchor for the souls of the dead that were said to return to the beach with the tide. Behind the scenes, the planet was named for Savarine Brandy, which was first mentioned in the West End role-playing game from the 90s. And that takes us to the end of my first installment of the Essential Planets of Star Wars. I know there are other planets that appear in the live-action movies like Felucia and other worlds seen during Order 66. I'll be covering them in a future volume, probably focused on the Clone Wars and the planets that are more important to that story. If you want to know more about galactic geography, check out the video I did on all of the regions of the Star Wars galaxy. If you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the channel to learn more about Star Wars, follow us on our socials, and consider checking out our Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.